Alright, so we're here today. This is a Year 12 Language and Lit panel discussion. It's issues of language and gender, which is connected to the language in a cultural context unit, where we've studied things like language and identity. And with identity, it's about like self-power and self-realization, but also then looking at issues of language and how language can be turned against you. Language can be able to bully and to abuse your power. And then we've looked at things like language and communities and language and nationhood. And then we've gone into our third cluster, which is about language and gender. So there's a provocative image here, actually. So this is from a CNN article. We're going to look at this together as a class, read through shortly. A very provocative image, and the title of this article is called War on Campus, the escalating battle over college free speech. Okay, so we'll come back to that later. But the email that I sent out to you says, today we'll be having a discussion around issues of feminism. And I've invited teachers to join us, Ms. Davies, Ms. Logues, Mr. Parker, Mr. Arriaga, Mr. Chan. And I want to discuss, especially connecting to the boys actually, the schism in public discussions of alt-right and alt-left. Now what does that even mean? What does that even mean? Well, there's a pretty handy guide here to bias in the media. Okay, we like to think that when we get the news, it's objective, it's just the facts, it's just what happens. But actually, there's left-wing opinion, there's right-wing opinion, and all of these news organisations like CNN, Fox, they're owned by companies, and those companies have agendas sometimes. So part of the course in language and literature is being able to distill when there is a coded message being sent to you. All right. Now CNN is actually here. It's on the centre of the chart, but it's more of a liberal left-wing organisation. In the United States, CNN are pro-Democrat. So that was Obama's party, and now the Republicans are in charge. Republicans are right-wing, so they're conservatives. And a news organisation that's often associated with them is Fox News. So we'll look at that, maybe amongst the discussion. We're living in a really strange era where the President of the United States has been caught on camera saying things that are extremely misogynistic, but it doesn't seem to rock the backing of his core group. So how can that be? And if the President of the United States is saying things which are misogynistic, well, what about everyone else? I think that there's a real division in the landscape, and I think that social media is really fueling this. And so it's hard to offer advice and guidance when you've got such extreme opinions, and that's from the right and the left. The image that I started with is of so what can we notice about this guy being escorted away by the police? Well, he's actually wearing a brown shirt, which is from the Nazi brown shirt movement. So this guy's a neo-Nazi, he's part of the alt-right. He's wearing a little insignia there showing that he is a member of that association. And he's being marched away from a demonstration on a university campus. So university campuses should be avenues of free speech, but it's not the case. Now, we know that the Nazism and fascism is bad, right? But things have actually lurched to the other extreme, where you have the alt-left also protesting and shutting down speech on university campuses. So we're going to talk today about history and evolution of where has the feminist movement come from? What are some of the reactions and where are they coming from about feminism, which means that people can be labelled extreme feminists in a derogatory way, but then who's saying that? What's some of the language or the perspectives that are fueling that? What are the justifications, if any, for these kind of viewpoints? And so I hope that through our discussion today we can talk about the evolution of the feminist movement. We can talk about the influences on our backgrounds, so me growing up in Kent, the United Kingdom, so I went to an all-boys grammar school, so it was like very white, very male, culturally informed. We've got people here from Hong Kong, people here from Kansas. Miss Logues is from Kansas in the United States, Miss Davies is from Liverpool in England, Mr. Arriaga from Spain. So we're going to talk maybe about different cultures, different identities, different patterns of how language, how the media can reinforce certain aspects of our identity for better or worse. Okay, I'm going to actually ask Logsy, can you please pause the recording now? I want to give people time to have a read over this article because I think that this will help drive our debate. So we've just finished reading the CNN article called War on Campus, the Battle Against Free Speech. It may be useful to just let you know what some of the, when we talk about left-wing versus right-wing opinion, but by the way, I'm talking in generalities. Just because right-wing on the board is close to fascism doesn't mean that someone who votes for a Republican or Conservative position is a fascist. So this is a very simplified, generalised table. But if we're in the centre of things, we're here. Now, there is a newspaper in the UK that aspires to be free of political bias. I'm not sure if it is anymore, but when Andrew Marr was the editor, The Independent wasn't funded by any political group, so it was in the centre. That's the best example I think I can give. To the right, we're moving into the right wing. So conservatism, traditionalists, people who, maybe the older generation typically, who want things to stay the same and the cultural values that they grew up with to be maintained. The Times, a newspaper that's read by bankers, it's read by people with a university education. A bit further to the right, you have the Daily Telegraph, that's often read by CEOs and judges. We're very much like defenders of the old establishment. Right wing in the United States, more of a tabloid organisation, is Fox News, who are actually classified as an entertainment channel, not a news channel. And at the right wing, the furthest right, you've got institutions that are very new, like Breitbart and InfoWars, and they promote often alt-right and even neo-Nazi-based ideas. Typically, in America, what does it mean? It means to have lower government interference, to have more individuality. You want to pay lower taxes to allow you that individual freedom, whereas the left wing are more like socialists and Democrats, and they believe in a higher tax rate for the rich, so that leads to higher education and higher healthcare. And left-wing opinions tend to be things like pro-gay marriage, pro-abortion, pro-choice, sorry, yeah, thank you, and pro-female rights, or you know, yeah, like not just like one voice. So I'm going to ask first Miss Logues to talk about what. I'm going to ask you to respond to this soundbite. So this is from Donald Trump, and we want to look at how language is reflective of the cultural conditions. And you'll have heard this soundbite before, and I would like you as an American really, and as a female perhaps, to discuss what's evolving in the media at the moment. So we'll switch now here.
I'm sure.
Can you give us a chance? Your organization. You are attacking our news organization. Can you give us a chance to ask a question, sir?
Go ahead.
Sir, can you state, Mr. President-elect,
go ahead.
Can you state
She's asking a question. Don't
Mr.
be rude.
President-elect, can you give us a question?
Don't be rude.
Attacking us. Can you give us a question?
Don't be rude. No, I'm not going to give you a I'm not going to give you a question.
Can you state categorically?
You are fake news.
Sir,
go ahead.
Can you state categorically that nobody, Mr. President-elect, that's not appropriate.
Okay, so yeah, Ms. Logues, like fake news, Trump as the demagogue. What's your response to that?
Okay. So I would actually, can you slide the screen back and show the chart that you had? Great. So just to add a bit more context here and link it to the video clip. I would say also over here, you have news organizations. The US equivalent of the Times would probably be like the Wall Street Journal. So you have this kind of low government, low taxes, low regulations on businesses, whether that be environmental regulations, financial regulations. Generally, I think the Republican Party has stood for this kind of wealthy business owners who want capitalists, basically, who want nothing to stand in their way of making more capital. And that's traditionally been a pretty big sector of the Republican Party. And these people, I think, voted for Trump, not because they really care about fake news and kind of the racial dog whistles that Trump is using, and they really don't even care about this stuff, the social progressivism. They mostly just care about money. Okay, so you have one segment of the Republican Party that has this kind of financial, like this is their main goal, and they really don't care, you know, who gets thrown under the bus in the achievement of their fiscal goals. I think where Trump is different from previous Republicans like, say, Mitt Romney, John McCain, even George W. Bush, is that he's really appealing to working class white people who do not benefit so much from this, you know, if a company is able to skirt government regulations because the Environmental Protection Agency is disbanded by Trump, which is basically what's happening, and so therefore they're dumping all of their chemicals into a working class area's water supply or whatever, obviously that's not benefiting those people, but those people are voting for Trump because of some of these social issues and because of that you alluded to earlier, kind of the social conservatism of we want the values to be as they were when things were really good for white men with no college education. Like when you could leave high school, you could get a job in a factory, and you could make enough to support a family of 4 without having to go to university. And so those days are gone because of, I would argue, globalization is a big part of it. But Trump kind of appealed to that group of people by alluding to some of these things. And you also have, like, there's a migrant caravan coming to invade our border, which he talked about in the lead up to the recent election, and like 3 weeks after the election it hasn't been mentioned since. So you get this appeal to kind of these social issues in an attempt to get working class white people to more solidly vote for the Republican Party. And then also you have this pro-individual, so the Republican Party has pretty successfully dismantled a lot of union rights in the US. Most states where working class white people live, like Kansas, unions don't exist. So that right to work states, which basically means you have a right to be fired for any reason at any time. So there's, sorry to go into that one, maybe that isn't as relevant to our topic, but that's my kind of initial, yes.
Add something to that, which is that there's a great irony that the people in America seem disenfranchised, and it's the same across large parts of Europe, which are the lower middle class, less educated white males. They've turned to right-wing capitalism / fascism, despite the fact that it's the right wing that led to their loss of status in society. It's right-wing neo-capitalist thinking that enabled globalization, that promoted Western businesses to manufacture everything in China, that destroyed America's manufacturing base, combined with automation and other factors, all of which are of the right. Yet they've turned to someone of the right who's claiming to solve all of their problems with more of the same policies. That's a very interesting state of affairs.
and it's an emotional appeal, right? So it's like, yes, I'll solve your problems by, some of it's outright lies, like, oh yes, we're going to bring back all of those manufacturing jobs from China and Mexico. No, that isn't true. But you guys have probably studied World War II to some extent. So there's the idea of having a scapegoat, not a scapegoat, but a scapegoat, right? So someone who takes the blame for something. So in the rise to World War II, you have Hitler using the Jews as a scapegoat, as, oh, we're in this terrible economic situation, but it's these people's fault, right? So I see that happening in the US right now, this like, oh, it's all the immigrants, it's their fault that you're in this terrible situation. Is it really? No. But,
and you see that in Europe with the rise of the right across many countries with Brexit and Britain leaving the EU, with the separatist Catalonia movement in Spain, people looking for people to blame. And one argument for that is that we're in a time of stagnating economic growth, and so people are uncertain about the future. So our generosity to our fellow people depends on our willingness to see that the future is going to be better than the present, and if we lose that faith, suddenly we become much more inward-looking. We look after our nation, our family, people who are like us based on gender or race.
In groups, right?
Yeah, that's it. We fall into these narrow in-groups, and that is sort of reminiscent of Nazi Germany.
So I wonder how we can spin this back to gender, language and gender. So conservatism and traditionalism is maintaining the world as you knew it, as you know it, or knew it to be. And I think feminism came about as a reaction to the fact that the world was constructed by white men. So Western European powers, they were the colonial powers, the precursor to globalization. Apart from like Queen Elizabeth I, you're generally dealing with heads of state who tend to be kings, or the governments or the aristocracy where the men are in charge. Feminism came about in the 1960s, although we can before then.
Like first wave feminism, second wave feminism. Like
okay, so let's do that. What are the roots of feminism?
I would start, so when you have the founding, so the Enlightenment, right, it's 1700s, which is kind of when people first start spreading ideas that maybe it wasn't predestined by a higher power that we are meant to be ruled by a king, and maybe actually we can make our own decisions and we have power over our own fate. Okay, so Enlightenment, and most of the Enlightenment thinkers that you heard about were white European men. But at that time, obviously, women are also like, hey, yes, we should have some power to decide our own fate, and maybe this hasn't been preordained and we have to live this way. So in the US, you have a 1776 Revolutionary War, independence, US forms as a country, democracy, like first, I guess, modern democracy. And as they're debating the forming of what this new country is going to look like, there are exchange of letters between John Adams, who was the second president of the United States, and his wife, Abigail Adams, who was saying to him as he's writing the Constitution, don't forget the women, we're people too. And, well, that didn't really end up making its way into the Constitution, but so as early as the Enlightenment, really you have a feminist movement. Also, just to link this to race as well, because we're discussing that, the compromise they came up with was that if you were black, you weren't quite fully a person. You were 3/5 of a person was the compromise that they came up with. Yeah. So I would say roots of the feminist movement is in the Enlightenment, which is really the roots of anybody thinking that they have free will and determinism. And then, okay, so the women's suffrage in the U.S., mid-1800s, so around the time of the Civil War, you have women coming together for conventions where they're arguing for the right to vote. I know in Britain in the early 1900s, you have Emily Pankhurst, okay? Yeah, who threw herself in front of a horse in protest that she, so she, votes for women. So this is first wave feminism is what it's called. Then in the 1960s, 70s, you have what's called second wave feminism, which is, okay, we have the right to vote, but I still can't buy a house without my husband's permission. I can't get a credit card. I can't really have a job, and if I'm married, I definitely will be fired for getting married. The pill is invented, which gives people sexual freedom, women sexual freedom. And so that's second wave feminism, and that's kind of where you,
Right, so second wave feminism then, we look at 1960s as an explosion of social rights, the Civil Rights Act in the United States, and now, we're sort of 50, 60 years on, aren't we? So, can we say, Ms. Davies, that we're, it's a loaded question, we're living in now an equal world, and what are some of the major barriers that females face in achieving equality? Because there's the vote, right? There's the house ownership.
Yeah.
So what else is at play?
For female equality?
Yeah, for female equality, what's the major barriers today?
Well, quite frankly, the second wave feminism we're talking about is very white-centric. White females, a lot of white females mobilise, so it's a lot of white voices, and we're getting like the new wave now is incorporating many women, and the branch of what we would define women by as well is changing as well. So and are we equal? No.
we see that in you'll see it if you go and apply to your university courses. Still, statistically, massively underrepresented in science and engineering, females. If you look at the constitution of the UK Parliament, only 24% of the UK Parliament are female.
Parliament. Yeah.
Is that exclusively male?
No, I can't remember the exact.
Almost exclusive.
It's like 4%. 4%. It's really small.
And then industry leaders, CEOs, directors of companies, political leaders. While there has been, a black president of the United States, but maybe like Trump was in that election was the absolute rejection of a female president of the United States.
I think to Obama and to
So I think what we're saying is that it's deeply woven into accepted ideology within society, and that covers everything from politics to the kind of texts that are produced by the dominant voices within society, and they obviously they proliferate their own standpoint, don't they? If you have the dominant voice, then you produce more of the dominant voice, and it reduces the notion of challenge. So I think we have to be really open to that, and you see that in, I guess, expectations of leadership of companies, even male voices in the media, all of those things. I think you just have to question what is already there and what exists in order to change.
And I think you could look at the word representation and just break that down. So it's what's happened, something has happened, or someone said something, and then it's how it's represented in the media. So some of the barriers, if you don't have a vote, okay, very obvious. If you don't have the right to own property, that's very obvious. But some of the things could be a bit subtler. We looked at the documentary Misrepresentation. We looked at the power of the media actually to convey very powerful messages that condition people to certain gender roles. Mr. Arriaga, I wonder if you could speak. Like maybe some of the softer things could be about language, how we label people. And I was thinking so Hillary Clinton, a male might be the boss, in charge, authoritative, dominating. She could be represented as shrill, hysterical,
But look what
bossy.
the media will comment about female power. They'll comment first and foremost what she's wearing, what she looks like. They won't do
Did
that.
she get a new haircut?
Yeah, she got a new haircut. What is she trying to portray through her clothes? They do not do the same thing for men.
Misrepresentation highlights that very well, I think.
And
so I think you have systemic features of oppression, which are like the right to vote, but then you also have kind of, I guess, what would we call them, institutionalized, more subtle the things like, oh, the media is talking about a newly elected female senator's coat and like what brand it is and
how could she afford that?
right, which is
now, so we might choose certain adjectives in the English language, but in the Spanish language, in Latin languages, there are actually there's genders, right? There's the masculine and the feminine. Does that mean that people fall into different categories? Like, are they put into two different pools of binary oppositions, or?
Well, Romance languages like Spanish, Italian, Portuguese, they have gender for nouns and also for adjectives, right? So there is a tendency, which is, I would say, on the lines of the false press spreading that, yeah, we have to change the language too because this word is masculine and it should be feminine, and kind of blaming the language, which is mainly arbitrary in the way it was built up for their ending, right? So there is a confusion sometimes between gender between male and masculine, which is not the same thing, right? So
how do you define masculine?
masculine is, well, in Greek, for example, and in Latin, there was every word should be should be masculine, feminine, neuter. So, for example, a word like problema was neuter in Greek, and ends in a, okay, and a word like polemon. Well, let me choose now what for Latin I would feel better. Rose was feminine, okay, but then Rosmarino and then Rosemary was masculine. So this is mainly, there is not a big, there is not decided. It wasn't really decided by anybody sitting down. Let's have a meeting and let's term this word is masculine or feminine. Why bottle is feminine? Why chair is feminine? And why projector is masculine? Right? These are the linguistic features of this thing. Now, what happens, for example, when a word like problema comes into a language that doesn't have neuter anymore? When the language sorted, again, by default into, in this case, the masculine category. So, is it on purpose? Is somebody behind this, controlling why problema has to fit into the masculine category instead of the feminine, despite the ending in a, for example. So I can only say that sometimes things are taken to an extreme where people get engaged in, oh yeah, perhaps, but it's a bit like, how do you say this concept when there is sorry, I forgot the word.
You think about political correctness.
Sorry?
You think about political correctness.
Yeah, of course, that's linked to it. But okay, I forgot the word, but I'm sure you'll agree with me that there's not voluntary relationship between the fact that the word history in English begins with his is not because male, because actually it comes from Latin and the masculine and feminine in Latin comes at the end, not in the beginning. But this is taken to extreme. Like, why is history not herstory? Right? Should you talk about history and herstories?
Can I speak up on this one? Because I think it's quite an important point that you're making, that okay, it seems to be accidental that society comes up with feminine and masculine genders for neutral words. So as a chair is feminine, and as a cup is feminine, whatever it is, right? But the fact that you have these binary choices, or maybe three choices if you include neutral, already sets up a structure in your mind that there are these genders. Because the language imposes certain ways of thinking, and that's what interests me really, in that we've struggled to get beyond our language, and that is a cage around our thinking. So immediately when we have these concepts of masculine and feminine, that already we're breaking up the world into those things, when the reality is much more complex. There's much more to the world than simply these two binary choices. So an example that I often draw upon, I'm a keen snowboarder, and I often hear it said that Eskimos have over 50 words for snow. And yet to me, because I only know English, I only know the word snow, it's all snow. But actually, if you have different words for snow, it is much more descriptive of those things. Right? Recently, a few years ago, I learned that there's another sense, umami. Has anyone heard of umami?
Yeah.
Flavor, right? So that's sorry, there's a different taste, right? Flavor.
Yeah, it's kind of like savory, actually.
Right.
It's meaty, it's not savory.
Well, it depends.
Okay, right. So we don't really need to define now, but obviously, growing up, I always associated the taste with sweet, sour, salty, and so on. Okay, but now there's this whole new taste which has become known to me, right? But before I didn't have a word for it, I didn't even know it existed. Okay, and again, our experience has been constrained, or my experience in this case has been constrained by language. So the fact that we have just masculine and feminine in our minds has constrained us. And so when we came to, when Mr. Rees was discussing this with me, certainly that was why I came really, what I was interested in. And so what I'm saying to Mr. Arriaga is that, yes, I'm sure that there isn't a deliberate policy of saying, okay, this is female, this is male, but the fact that we already have a language that sets it up in that way makes us think about it.
But see how arbitrary it could be, and the word I was looking for before is conspiracy. I mean, there is no conspiracy behind this. It is true, of course, the language, fixed our first few things, and knowing more language and more words and will humble that. But let's talk about something that probably will.
Can I do a little experiment?
Just let me finish this example first. Both male and female sexual organs have words in Spanish, Latin, and other languages I know that could be both masculine and feminine. And both, it could be. So something as prototypically sexual as a penis can be male or female. Sorry, I said the wrong thing. Masculine or feminine. So that's how arbitrary this could be.
But I think you can recognize the arbitrary nature of that, but still see that having that binary opposition filters your thinking in certain ways. And so I think actually both of your points are valid. That yes, it's not a conspiracy and it's not set up in a very strict fashion, but that it's definitely pigeonholing us into two separate ways of thinking. Masculine and feminine.
Possibly, you might want to read the War of Hypothesis, which is really interesting. The students have read it, and it talks exactly about constructing the world and not having the access of a language of thought. If you don't have that, then your view of the world has changed. I think it would be really interesting in that.
It's part of the HT curriculum, so it's something that's come up in other discussions before.
So I'm just going to do a little experiment. I don't know Spanish, so this might go horribly wrong, and we can all laugh at me. So I'm just going to say some words, and I want you to reply either masculine or feminine. Okay. Pilot.
Pilot, masculine or feminine pilot?
Masculine.
There's both.
Okay. Doctor.
Doctor is one.
What is doctor?
Could be both.
However, I am still, as an English speaker, I'm still thinking doctor, pilot, predominantly male.
Right, so we call that marked terms in linguistic study. Because of assumptions, because of those ingrained assumptions within society, we have a reflection of dominant ideology. So quite often, if I were to say, I'm going to go and see a doctor, we assume it's a man, we say, oh, what do we say? And you have to correct them and say she. It's a marked term because people expect you to indicate when they are female, when they are male. So you would have to say a female doctor. You might indicate you had a female pilot on the plane. On the other hand, you might have to indicate that you had a male nurse because of the way that society has woven in a kind of hierarchy, a gender hierarchy there. Yeah.
Sorry, this relates to something that Mr. Morgan and I were discussing with our HT class earlier this week, which is that it's become more acceptable in our culture for women to be more masculine. So, as an example of that, we're all wearing trousers, which 50 years ago, we would not have been allowed to wear to work, because, yeah. So, and, right, if we were. And girls weren't even allowed to wear them to school, right? Like, there were rules against girls wearing trousers to school. And everyone in this room, basically, is wearing something that could be worn by either a male or a female student. You're wearing a hoodie, or you're wearing a t-shirt, or you're wearing sneakers, or whatever. But, and it was good, the example I used with Mr. Morgan. So that day, I happened to be wearing a dress. Mr. Morgan was wearing jeans and a hoodie. And I said, okay, I could come to school wearing jeans and a hoodie, and nobody would even look at me twice. But if Mr. Morgan walked in wearing my pretty pink dress with my lovely brown boots, yeah, he would get a lot of looks and laughter and confused. And if he weren't, you know, an authority figure, if he were a student, he would probably get picked on. Yeah. So I think
Sam can carry that on.
So I think masculinity is still something that society says is great and is wonderful, and it's okay for all of us to attempt to be masculine. But femininity is still seen as lesser. So like, yeah, it's okay for me to attempt to be more masculine and what are some of the adjectives? Yeah, strong, powerful, whatever. But it isn't maybe seen as okay by society for a man to attempt to be feminine. And you hear this in the slurs that people use, right? Like, oh, that's for girls. Yeah.
Now, there's this idea of like placing people into a certain social role and having certain expectations because of the language used. And I think Mr. Chan, you said that in Swedish society, they thought this was such a big problem, they've actually introduced a new pronoun.
Yeah, that's right. Well, I mean, I think the gender-neutral pronoun is hen. So the equivalent of his and her, which is obviously widely used in Sweden. I think 2 or 3 years ago, it became more official to use a gender-neutral pronoun. And I think even in English, it has become an accepted way of referring to people in the third person. Right?
Yeah, we use the singular they all the time. I mean, yeah, we use it. Yeah, all of us use it. But yeah.
Yeah, so rather than referring to someone as his or her, saying they, I think that is a way of trying to overcome this problem that we have in English of distinguishing between the male and female. And again, you know, I think it's a way that language is constraining our perceptions of what it is to be human, thinking that there has to be either male or female. We're becoming more educated and more enlightened, and you know, as a man, but who has a daughter and has a wife and a mother and so on. You know, I want to see the human race continue to break down the barriers that women and girls are facing. And language is part of it.
Can we talk about, after this topic, it'd be nice to talk about kind of attitudes, why attitudes to that viewpoint, right, progressive viewpoint.
I think we live in particularly interesting times as far as patriarchy and feminism go, because I think for a long time feminism made ground and made the lives of women and men better. And men were able to give certain things up without much resistance, because the position of men in society was such that they weren't losing too much. I think though, with the breakdown of a lot of traditionally male jobs through automation and through globalization, which is only getting worse, I think we're now actually seeing an alarming backlash against feminism. You see that on the internet, you see that in the kinds of memes that are shared by men, the sort of misogyny that you see on sites like Reddit. And I think that reflects the fact that men now are less secure in their position in the world than ever, which ironically hasn't given men generally much empathy for the position that women have had in society for a very, very long time. Right? Instead of engendering empathy, that feeling of being out of power, out of control, has led to a backlash against women. And I think boys now, growing into men, have it harder than than men have had for a long time, because simultaneously parts of the world are telling them to be more sensitive to gender and their roles in society and equality. At the same time, popular culture and certain political leaders are telling men to, be men, to be as masculine as they can. Yeah, exactly. And the middle ground there, like so much of politics, the difference between left and right, the difference between people of different races, different genders, we're losing the middle ground, and things are becoming more polarized. And so how you decide who to be as a man and who to be as a woman, as a boy and a girl growing up, I think is just massively confusing.
Yeah, and I think that when I was growing up, I don't think it was great actually, but I went to a almost all white boys grammar school. Like the purpose of grammar schools really was just to replicate the values of British empirical power, and then go somewhere else in the empire and run the colony according to be a satellite of that. I mean, that was the purpose why they were set up. And so it was very much like that very traditional blazer, tie. When the headmaster comes in the black gown, everyone stands up. And so an all-male crowd like that will propagate all-male viewpoints. There was a lot of sexism. There was a fair bit of racism. And it's nice, thankfully, years on, to have gone around the globe and actually tempered my viewpoint on the world. Now here at this school, I think we are living in a really, we're a lovely school, it's a very friendly place. I think we can see through the clothing, but also the relationship, the attitudes, that there's a lot of respect and equality, but it's not to say that even at this school, like bullying is small, but it does exist. Sexist values could be, they are an issue, let's be honest, they not often, but I think we have to work assertively. If we really believe that there should be equality, plurality between the sexes and the opportunities of what girls and boys can go on to achieve, then it's something that actually we have to work quite hard towards maintaining, because in the wider world there are these really confusing, polarizing messages. And the thing is, rational debate and discussion often gets left aside because the nature of social media is click on it, like it, trend it, and then it grows exponentially and becomes the dominant narrative, and it's fueled by emotion. And that could be on the left wing, it could be on the right wing, and I think that's another reason why it's very confusing for boys growing up today, because they're bombarded with conflicting messages. And that's one of the things I wanted to get at today. Like, I understand through conversations in the corridor and in the class that young men, I think, at this school and around the world are worried about what they perceive to be a backlash against their identity, and so where's that coming from? Is there a justification? How can they, so let's get some of the facts of the issue, rather than just the beliefs. I don't know, Miss Davies, living in Hong Kong, born and bred Liverpool.
Yeah.
What do you see as some of the subtler, the sort of the microaggressions that might mean we're still not living in this equal world?
In Hong Kong?
In Hong Kong.
When I fill in my visa application every year, men tick bachelor, and because I'm not married, and as a woman I have to tick spinster.
Yeah, I definitely screenshotted that the last time I filled it out.
Think of the connotations of being a spinster and the connotations of being a bachelor in society. A bachelor, we get this, we see these connotations, these good-looking men living their best lives, James Bond, and the connotations of being a spinster is this like awful, shriveled
cat lady.
Yeah.
So I filled mine in, last one in a few months ago, and that time I was 29, okay? And I've been filling it in since I moved here at 22. And every time I tick it, I have to tick spinster.
On the back of that, we have the same kind of thing. Men who sleep sneak around are
Yes.
called what? What are they called? Studs,
Slayers.
players.
Women are whores.
Women are whores
And
and sluts, and they are dirty. It's true, it's ingrained in the language. The language reflects society,
Yeah.
and then that's reflected back at the language
Also,
and back to the society.
I am married now. I'm no longer a spinster. So I check a different box now. When I got engaged, the first question people ask me, when are you gonna have kids?
Oh my god.
Because you're not a woman unless you're a mother. Like,
Yeah, you aren't
Just-
you can't
yeah.
yeah.
Look, so then there's another thing which I want to discuss. I think that we can say like the world is still gendered. There are still like subtle but also overt abuses of power based upon the language choices that are used. But I feel like some of that comes back to the boys in a sense that okay, so the language that I use or the role that I perform within society, if I do anything that's male or masculine, it puts me into a category which can be ring-fenced along with like sexual abuse or overt abuses of their male status.
But isn't that often because we make too many allowances?
How so?
Like-
How so?
Boys
Boys will be boys, right?
right?
We make those allowances and we never really get out of it because we are continually making allowances for that behaviour, which then filters into other aspects, you know? I feel like if girls did the same things boys would do, completely different.
Yeah.
Ben made that point a few years ago. A member of staff complained about 4 years ago. Oh, the girls in this year 7 group are so rowdy. And
Why
Ben
not?
said, just stop,
Why not?
stop for a minute.
Why can't we be rowdy?
Yeah. They're not as rowdy as the boys, but you're not complaining about the boys. Why are you only complaining about the girls? What are your preset societally constructed expectations of these girls that makes you complain about them? Why shouldn't they be noisy? Why shouldn't they be assertive?
Why are girls expected to command the boys in group work? Why do we need to put so many good girls in classes? Why is it their responsibility to maintain, to educate the boys?
Yeah.
Why do we have to automatically take on the role of mother to these boys? These girls are 11, the boys are 11. Why can't they act like 11-year-old boys? Why not?
As we get to the final moments, I'd like to just make sure that I say a word of caution to boys who believe that like they're too hard done by. The Reddit or Breitbart world will reinforce it's confirmation bias. Like if you believe you're hard done to, and then there's voices, and there's very seductive and very eloquent voices telling you that you're kind of disabused or that the world is against you and your rights are restricted. But I think it's worthwhile laying against the backdrop of the fact that we still haven't achieved gender equality after hundreds of years of trying, and that a lot of the viewpoints that you find these kind of, so Alex Jones or Milo Yiannopoulos, they're published on things like Breitbart. Breitbart publish neo-Nazi viewpoints. So be careful of taking a voice from one of those standpoints and using it to support your position. Also be aware that if you're engaged with someone who just lashes out and labels you as a rapist figure, that you then condemn feminism, or you believe like extreme feminism is something that exists. I mean, that there are people who are outspoken and misguided and use abusive language and have fixed mindsets on both sides of the aisle, and one internet troll is not representative of a whole movement. You're much better off like looking, listening, reading, discussing, thinking about the lives that you want to lead, that are valuable, the relationships that you want to have, that you want to promote as being equitable and fair and progressive and productive. So you are being conditioned, and it's up to you. It's really quite a tough job for all of us, male, female, left wing, right wing, whatever, to actually distinguish the facts from the emotive beliefs. And have we missed any key points?
I just want to say to the women, never apologise for having a voice, and to the men, don't expect women to apologise for having a voice.
All right, we'll leave that there. Thanks very much, everyone, for taking part.
Thank you, John.
Chris,